If you're hearing this right now, it's because somehow you also feel that strange pull toward empty places. Those forgotten spots on the map where no one goes anymore, where the silence is so heavy it feels like it's staring back at you. Tonight, I'm taking you straight into places like that. Four stories, four abandoned, desolate locations, four people who swear they saw what no one should ever see. And while you listen, really think about this. If it were you there, alone, what would you do? Take a deep breath, turn off the lights if you dare, and let's begin. Story 1. The Hospital in the Fog. They say that, high up in the mountains of British Columbia, there's a hospital that never appeared on any map. It was built in a rush decades ago, during an outbreak of some strange illness nobody could properly explain. When the outbreak ended, the hospital was simply emptied. Doctors left, patients vanished, documents disappeared. No official closure, no record, only the building stayed, lost on a ridge, wrapped in fog for most of the year. Most people think it's just a local legend, but David doesn't. David was a nature photographer, used to hiking alone, sleeping in tents, getting lost in forests. Nothing scared him, at least that's what he used to say. Until that night. He left before dawn, planning to hike up a trail while it was still dark, set up his tripod, and catch the sunrise above the fog. Simple plan. But halfway up, the trail disappeared. The fog rolled in strangely thick, like a wall of smoke that refused to move. He could barely see his own boots. He tried to go back. He couldn't. The GPS on his phone started spinning in place, struggling to find his position. No bars, no signal. He walked blind for a few minutes until he noticed he wasn't stepping on dirt anymore. The sound of his boots changed. It stopped being that soft crunch of soil and leaves and turned into an echo of something solid, something built. When the fog thinned just enough, David finally saw it. A corridor, moldy walls, old wooden doors, some cracked open, bare bulbs hanging from wires, no light, a hospital on top of a mountain. Okay, that makes no sense, he thought, but the fear came later. First came curiosity. He lifted his camera and took a shot of the hallway, even in the dark. The flash exploded, lighting everything for a second. Peeling paint, rusty gurneys against the walls, a corkboard lying on the floor. He took a few steps forward. There were handwritten signs on the doors, almost erased by time. Ward 3, isolation, observation. The letters were shaky, like someone had written them in a hurry. That's when he noticed something wrong. Everything looked like it had been abandoned in a rush, but there was no dust, no cobwebs. No thick layer of powder on the gurneys, on the metal counters, on the old chairs. It was as if everyone had left yesterday. And yet the place smelled like very old mold and something long sealed away. He walked deeper in, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" "Hey!" His voice echoed down the corridor. No answer. Just a low, constant hum, like a generator running somewhere far, far away. But there were no lights, no machines. He stopped at an almost closed door with the sign, "Isolation." He pushed it gently. The flash lit the room for a split second. 3 empty beds, metal bars, a chair in the corner, turned with its back to the door. When the light died, his heart started pounding. Because, for a moment, he was absolutely sure someone was sitting in that chair, head bowed. He held his breath. Darkness swallowed the room again. The hospital felt even quieter than before. He hit the shutter again. Flash, chair, empty. He laughed, nervous, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination. Then he lowered the camera and saw, out of the corner of his eye, that the chair wasn't in the same position as before. It seemed turned a few centimeters, just enough to notice. He hadn't heard it move. Not a scrape, not a creak. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. His hands went clammy. His mouth went dry. He took a step back, tripped on his backpack, and fell. The camera slipped from his hand, skidding across the floor to the door. The door slammed shut, by itself. David rushed to it, grabbed the handle, locked. He threw his shoulder against it. Nothing. From the other side, silence. He started to shout. His own yell bounced back so loud it sounded wrong, like someone else was screaming with him, slightly out of sync. "Help!" he screamed. And the echo answered, "Oh, ELP, ELP!" Then the sound changed. In the middle of the echo, between the he and the LP, something else slipped in. A short, rough chuckle. He leaned his forehead against the door, breathing fast, throat tight. Out in the hallway, something started scratching the wood, slowly, from top to bottom, a long scrape like nails on a coffin lid. David backed away, heart beating so hard it hurt. He stared at the door, expecting to see a shadow under it, a movement, anything, nothing. The scratching stopped. A few seconds later, the sound came back, behind him. There was no door behind him, only a wall. He turned slowly. He ran his hand along the surface, searching for some crack or sign. That's when he felt it. The wall was warm, like someone or something was leaning against the other side, breathing, and with every single breath the concrete seemed to pulse. His phone's flashlight started glitching, flickering, fading, coming back. In the last brief flash of light, he saw, right at eye level on that wall, marks, handprints, lots of them, different sizes. As if people had beaten desperately at that exact spot, trying to get out. But they weren't dry or faded. They were dark, wet, like they had just been pressed there. David's eyes widened. The breathing behind the wall got louder, closer, and mixed into it he heard words, low, whispered, coming from inside the concrete like the wall had a mouth.
"You think you gave me alone?"
That's the last thing he remembers clearly. Search and rescue found him hours later, already in the late morning, lying near the start of the trail, covered in dirt, his camera shattered, his fingers scratched and bleeding. He swore he'd spent the whole night trapped inside a hospital, but there was no hospital on that mountain, just pines, rock, and fog. Only the photos remained, most of them ruined, overexposed, blurred, except one, a hallway. And at the far end, almost out of frame, that same chair turned with its back to the camera, with someone sitting in it. When they zoomed in, they noticed something. The person had no defined outline. It was like a denser patch of fog, condensed into a human shape, head bowed, hands in its lap. And along the walls of the corridor, if you stared long enough, more details appeared. Handprints, exactly like the ones on the warm wall. David doesn't hike in the mountains anymore. And, to this day, when the fog comes down thick over that ridge, locals swear they can see the silhouette of a building up there. A building no one can ever find when they try to reach it. Story 2. The gas station on Dead Highway. On old highways, there's always a stretch that everybody avoids, not because of construction, not because of cops or checkpoints, but because, at some point, people started feeling they weren't alone there, even when they didn't see a soul. Dead Highway got its nickname after a massive pileup and a landslide shut it down years ago, somewhere in the rural Midwest. They built a new route, safer and better lit, with rest stops and big travel centers miles away. But some truckers still cut through the old road at night to save time. Ryan was one of them. It was around 3 in the morning when he realized he was running out of fuel. He glanced at the gauge, did the math, and knew he wasn't going to make it to the next town. That's when he saw the gas station. A dim glow in the distance, looked like one of those old independent stations with a fading sign and a flickering strip of neon. He slowed down, pulled the rig carefully into the lot. The place looked frozen in time. Old gas pumps with chipped paint, a low convenience store building with dusty glass, a partial neon sign hanging crooked. But the lights inside were on. It made no sense for a place like that to still be operating on a shut-down highway. Ryan left the engine idling, hopped down, and looked around. No movement, no hum of other cars. Just wind in his engine. He approached the pump. The display screen was off, but the hose looked intact. He pressed the button, mostly just to test it, and heard the click. Red digital numbers blinked to life. The technology didn't match the age of the pump. It looked too modern. That alone made him uneasy. But fuel was fuel. As he pumped gas, his skin prickled, the tiny hairs on his arms standing up. It felt like someone was watching him, not from far away, from somewhere very close. He looked toward the convenience store, and that's when he saw her. Behind the glass, inside, stood a woman. She wore an old-style gas station uniform, light shirt, baseball cap. She was just standing there behind the counter, staring right at him, expressionless. He jumped slightly, then lifted his hand in a small, awkward wave. She didn't wave back, didn't smile, didn't move, just stared. He finished filling the tank, put the nozzle back, and decided to go in and pay. Strange or not, the station seemed open, and he wasn't in the mood to mess with some weird drive-off situation. When he pulled the glass door open, a small bell above it chimed. The sound echoed too loudly, like the room was bigger on the inside than it looked from outside. But it wasn't. It was small, and it was empty. No one behind the counter, no woman. No attendant at all. The shelves were full of products, but they all looked old. Soda cans with designs that hadn't been used since the 80s and 90s, candy bars in discontinued packaging, car magazines from a time before smartphones. Everything he touched felt cold. Not cool. Cold. Like it had no temperature at all. Ryan called out, "Hey! Anyone working?" Silence. He thought about just leaving some cash on the counter and getting out, but something kept nagging at him. That heavy feeling of eyes on the back of his neck, like someone was standing inches behind him. He forced himself to turn around, muscles tight, every hair on his neck standing. He turned. The store was empty, but the items on the shelves had moved. The stack of soda cans that had been in one corner was now neatly arranged in another spot. A couple of snack bags were still swaying, as if someone had just brushed past them. A magazine that had been crooked on the rack before was now perfectly straight. Like someone or something had rushed through the room, fixing things between one blink and the next. "I just want to pay and leave," he muttered, raising the cash a little, as if speaking to a security camera. Then he heard a voice, low, from behind the counter. "We don't charge anymore." She was back, just there. Like she'd stepped out from behind a curtain he couldn't see. Her skin was pale, too pale, almost gray under the fluorescent lights, deep shadows under her eyes. Chapped lips. Her uniform was spotless, weirdly clean compared to the rest of the dusty store. She smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. "You can go," she said. "Save your money for the new highway." Ryan flinched at the tone she used for new highway, like it disgusted her, like the words tasted bitter. I insist." He placed the bills on the counter. "Keep the change." She tilted her head, as if listening to some distant sound only she could hear, then answered, "The change, the road will take." Right then, the lights flickered, all of them. At once. The fridge in the back clicked off, then on, then off again. He instinctively glanced around. When he looked back at the counter, she was gone. The counter was empty. The money was still there. The bell above the door chimed. The door was closed. Ryan felt a tight, painful pressure in his chest, a rising tide of pure panic. He grabbed the money, shoved it back into his pocket, and walked out fast. He didn't look back until he got into the truck and shut the door. He glanced at the station through the windshield. The place was completely dark. No neon, no glowing convenience store, no lights at all, just a ruin. Collapsed awning, glass shattered, pump rusted through. It looked like it hadn't been open in decades, but his tank was full. He swallowed hard, turned on the radio for company. Static, only static. He started the engine and pulled onto the road, the headlights cutting through the night. In the side mirror, as the station shrank behind him, something caught his eye. On the edge of the lot, half covered in weeds, a sign lay face up in the dirt. Just visible in the reflection, he made out the words, "In memory of the victims of the 1997 incident." Below that, smaller, air station and store destroyed by fire. 3 dead, attendant and 2 travelers. Ryan put his foot down. It was only much later, at home, that he remembered the detail that really didn't make sense. He remembered that the attendant was wearing a name badge. He hadn't read it clearly in the moment, but the shape, the color, they stuck in his memory. When he eventually searched for news articles about that accident, he found an old clipping with photos of the victims. The attendant was there, smiling shyly in her uniform. Badge pinned to her chest, name clearly visible. It was the same woman he'd spoken to, years after the fire that had destroyed that station for good. Story 3. The town beneath the reservoir. Not every abandoned place is on dry land. Sometimes the whole town is still there, just under the water, the little town of St. Seine. Jericho Falls, in rural Ontario, was flooded when they built a massive reservoir in the 80s. They promised compensation, new homes, better jobs. Half the families left willingly. The other half were pushed out by rising water. Now, where the town once stood, there's a wide, dark reservoir. Fishermen love it. Tourists take pictures of the view. But sometimes, when the water level drops too much, things appear that shouldn't. Elijah worked maintenance at the dam. One day, the level sensors showed a sudden, unexplained drop in one of the branches of the reservoir, much more than expected for that season. They sent him out by boat to inspect some of the older concrete structures for leaks. It was overcast when he went. The air was still. The surface of the water was smooth as glass. As he motored deeper into the narrow arm of the lake, he began to see shapes breaking the surface. At first, he thought they were tree stumps. Then he looked closer. The tip of a roof. A piece of chimney. The crooked top of a cemetery cross barely sticking up from the water. Old St. Jericho was surfacing. He cut the engine and let the boat drift, carried slowly forward by its own momentum. Below, through the murky water, he could make out the faint lines of roads, foundations of houses, all coated in a thick, dark slime. A dull unease grew in his chest. It felt like he was trespassing somewhere that did not want to be disturbed. Still, he had a job to do. He climbed down into the chilly water, which reached his waist, and waded carefully toward part of an old concrete outflow channel. The water around him felt wrong. It was cold, far colder than it should have been on a day like that. While he checked the walls for cracks, he heard something bump against the side of the boat. A hollow thud, repeating like something light tapping again and again. Annoyed, he turned, expecting to see a branch. It wasn't. It was a toy. A small wooden horse, simple and worn, bobbing against the hull as if being nudged from below. He grabbed it without really thinking. The paint was mostly peeled away, but he could still see patches of blue. Carved into one side, in clumsy letters, was a name. Michael. Elijah swallowed hard. He wasn't superstitious. But this felt like a message. A thin, bitter wind blew across the water, colder than the air before, coming from the deeper side of the reservoir. And then he heard them. Far away. Like they were playing somewhere just out of sight, running, calling to each other. The sound was coming from underwater. He froze, one hand still on the cracked concrete, the other clutching the toy horse. The laughter grew clearer, mingling with the murmur of adult voices. Snatches of conversation, someone calling out a name, a dog barking. It sounded like a normal day in a small town. But all of it came from below, from a place that used to be streets, now nothing but black water. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was echoes, weird acoustics, the wind, anything. Until one voice cut through the rest. Clear, close, right beside him. Give it back. He stopped breathing. The voice was a child's, but there was no joy in it. It was flat, demanding. Give it back, the voice repeated, softer this time, almost as if sinking. He looked down at the horse in his hand. Without thinking twice, he set it gently on the surface of the water. It didn't sink, but it didn't stay still either. It began to glide away, slowly, like someone was pulling it from below. It drifted, straight toward the darker, deeper section where the church steeple and rooftops vanished under the surface. Elijah stumbled backward, feet catching on something solid. A gravestone. The tip of a headstone, just visible above the lakebed silt, brushing his boot. The name carved into it had mostly worn away over the years, but the first few letters were still there. His heart slammed in his chest. He scrambled back into the boat clumsily, legs shaking. He fired up the engine with trembling fingers and steered away, refusing to look back at the drowned shapes, at the toy, at anything. But he did glance once, over his shoulder. For a split second, he thought he saw people standing between the ruins and half-submerged walls, still blurred silhouettes with hunched shoulders, facing him. Maybe it was just shadows. Maybe reflections. Maybe nothing. Maybe. No one at the dam wanted to take his story seriously. They laughed, told him it was stress, or sleep deprivation, or his brain trying to fill the silence. Then the water level dropped even further a few weeks later. They sent a survey team with cameras. The team came back with photos. You could clearly see the underwater remains of St. Sain. Jericho, rooftops breaking the surface, the steeple, collapsed houses, twisted fences. In one photo, way in the back, a tiny blue dot floated in the water. When they tried to zoom in, the file glitched out. The image broke into lines and static, colors bleeding everywhere. Only one detail stayed sharp: handprints, smeared from the inside of the camera's lens cover outward like someone had grabbed it from within. Tiny handprints, child-sized. And in the audio log from the same camera, a new noise appeared, one that hadn't been there before. Beneath a bed of static, a faint sound emerged. If you listened too long, a whisper, far away, almost impossible to hear. But some people swear it says, "We never left." Story 4, the station at the end of the line. Some railway lines don't really disappear, they just get erased from the map, the tracks rust. The weeds grow, the trains stop running, but the memory of the route stays. And sometimes what walks those tracks isn't a train. Hollow Ridge Station sat at the end of an old freight line in upstate New York, miles from any town. No houses nearby, no stores, just hills, scrubland, and a damp mist that clung to everything. Mark was an urban explorer, the kind of guy who loved sneaking into abandoned factories, empty office towers, forgotten tunnels. When he heard about a lost train station at the end of a dead line, he knew he had to film there. Nobody ever saw that video. He parked his car on a muddy side road and followed what was left of the tracks. The rails appeared and vanished under tall grass, but they still formed a clear path. The silence was so total that even his footsteps sounded wrong, too loud, out of place. After nearly an hour of walking, he saw the station. A long, low building of darkened wood, sagging under its own weight. Roof buckling in places, boards missing, faded signs hanging by a single nail. In front of it, a cracked platform, rusted iron benches, and a round clock on the wall, stopped at 3017. Mark grinned behind his camera. Perfect. He started narrating to himself, filming the building, the broken windows, the still clock, already imagining the editing, the thumbnail, the title. Then he checked the audio. The microphone picked up something strange. In the recording, he heard background noise, the sound of people moving, voices in the distance, hurried footsteps, boxes being dragged. The muffled chaos of a busy station during rush hour. But around him, in real life, there was nothing, just wind brushing through weeds. He thought it was interference, maybe some weird radio station bleed or a glitch in his camera. He hit record again, this time pointing the lens through a broken window into the station's interior. When he replayed it, one sentence stood out. Clear. Right next to the mic. Final boarding. Do not remain. He hadn't heard that with his own ears. His grin faded. Curiosity, though, was stronger than fear. He went inside. The smell of rot and dust was heavy. Under that, faint but undeniable, another smell drifted through the air. Coal smoke. Fresh. Like an engine had just pulled in a few minutes ago. The waiting area was lined with long benches, the ticket windows still intact behind dirty glass, old signs pointing to exit, restrooms, platform 1. On the floor, footprints had been worn into the dust, and above them, fresher prints, crisp edges, like they'd been made that very morning. He followed the newer tracks to a side door leading out to the platform. That's when he heard it. This time, it wasn't a recording. He heard it with his own ears, a train whistle. Far away, but unmistakable. His heart picked up speed. He pushed open the door, hinges screaming. The platform lay before him, swallowed in mist. The tracks disappeared into a smooth, white void. No engine, no headlights, but the sound kept coming. The rhythmic clank of wheels on rails, the squeal of brakes, steam hissing, the whistle again, closer now. It was as if something huge had just pulled up in front of him, something he couldn't see. The bench beside him shuddered, like someone had just dropped down onto it. Another bench farther along did the same a second later. A crumpled piece of paper blew across the platform, then flattened as though stepped on by an invisible foot. Dust pressed down around it, leaving a fresh shoe print. Mark shakily raised the camera, pointing it at the empty space in front of him. Through the lens, there was nothing but fog. But in the audio, the station was alive. Voices overlapped, people arguing about luggage, children whining, someone hawking newspapers with headlines from decades ago. Over it all, A tinny PA system voice struggled to cut through. "Attention passengers, this train does not return." Mark took a step back and nearly tripped over his own backpack. Something icy settled on his shoulder. Not wind, not imagination, it had weight. A hand. He whipped around, but the platform behind him was empty. The weight remained. Panic rippled through every muscle. Instinct screamed at him to leave, but when he glanced down at the tracks, something froze him in place. Footprints. Deep impressions in the dust, lined up carefully, marching from the platform edge into the gap between the rails and disappearing there, mid-step. Like dozens of people had boarded something standing there, something that wasn't visible but was undeniably real. He turned away from the tracks, determined to get out. That's when he noticed the clock on the wall again. It no longer showed 3017. Both hands were spinning, fast, going around and around in circles, jerkily, as if time itself was broken. They spun so quickly they blurred, then, suddenly, stopped. The clock now showed the exact minute he had stepped onto the platform. As if the station had decided that from this moment on, he belonged to it. The cold hand on his shoulder squeezed, hard. A voice, barely audible, whisper light, pressed against his ear. "You're already on the platform. Just step in." He squeezed his eyes shut, lunged forward, ripping free of that invisible grip, and ran. He tore through the waiting room, scattering debris, not caring what he knocked over, just needing to get to the entrance. He burst out of the front doors and fell to his knees outside. Behind him, the sound of the train surged, the engine roaring, metal shrieking, the whistle blaring as if something massive was pulling away, dragging its weight down the line. Then everything went quiet. When he finally turned around, panting, the station was still there, but it looked older, more windows shattered. Sections of the roof that had looked intact before now caved in, vines spilling through. It was as if the building had aged years in minutes. He didn't go back inside. He jogged along the rails, stumbling, eyes burning with tears he wouldn't admit were fear, glancing back over his shoulder every few steps. Only once he was in his car did he dare check the camera. Nothing. Every file from Hollow Ridge Station was corrupted. Each one, when opened, showed a black screen and a thick, buzzing static in the audio. Except one. One single clip had survived, only a few seconds long. In it, the camera was pointed down at the platform floor. You could see his boots, and right beside them, the clear marks of other feet, walking in the same direction, just inches away. The truly terrifying part was the reflection. In a sliver of broken glass on the opposite wall, you could see the whole platform as if the camera were pointed at it. Crowds. Dozens of figures standing on the tracks, waiting. Men in old suits, women in outdated dresses, kids holding hands, people with suitcases and hats, all dressed from different eras. They filled the platform, shoulder to shoulder. None of them moved. Every single one of them was staring in the same direction, the spot where Mark stood, as if all they were waiting for was for him to take just one more step. The clock over the scene read 3017. And buried in the audio, buried under layers of static and hiss, the PA voice repeated, again and again, "Next departure, next departure, next departure." 4 places. A hospital that appears and disappears in a mountain fog. A gas station that still takes customers long after it burned to the ground. A drowned town that still laughs and whispers under the surface of a reservoir. A dead-end station where the train comes without a body but never leaves empty. Now think about every time you've passed by an empty place, an abandoned building in your town, a boarded-up motel by the highway, an old road that got replaced by a newer, brighter one. An out-of-service station no one uses anymore. Are you sure it was really empty? The next time you feel that sudden chill, that heaviness in the air, that weird sense that someone's watching you, take another look around. These places aren't just empty. They're full of what stayed, full of stories that never finished, full of people who, maybe, never truly left. If you pulled into a lonely gas station on a forgotten road tonight, lights flickering in the dark, if you found a hospital standing where the map insists there's nothing, if you heard laughter bubbling up from under black water, or a train whistle echoing over rusted tracks, would you keep driving? Or would you step inside, just for a minute, Think carefully. If you made it this far, something in these stories held on to you. So if you want more tales like this, more eerie places, more almost true encounters, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments which story got under your skin the most, or which abandoned place near you deserves to become the next setting for a horror story. Because those forgotten spots are still out there, all over the map. While the world rushes past them, they're just waiting for someone to wander in, and someday that someone might be you.